Thank you, Tali. It's important to preface and emphasize that whenever we discuss any subject from the point of view of Jewish law, it could be the most cutting edge 21st century subjects of genetics, fertility, medical science. Everything is based on principles and precedents that are based in the Talmud and the codes. And this includes this topic also. And even though the 5 minutes will allow me only a couple of bullet points, but, and I won't give any references or details, I think there's a link will be posted of a more in-depth talk that I've given on the subject. So first of all, for those not familiar, IVF is a technique used when natural conception is not possible, and eggs are retrieved from the wife and inseminated by the husband's sperm. And at a certain point, when it becomes an embryo, it's transferred into the uterus. That's IVF. PGD, or PGS, is a method which was developed quite recently, by which the embryos are screened before implantation to screen for genetic mutations. So IVF in itself is a process that in cases of infertility, it is permitted, but on a condition that it's completely under the Halachic protocol and guidance. Once a couple is going through IVF, then PGD is also permitted in order to make sure that only healthy embryos are transferred. But what about those cases when there are no infertility issues and the couple wants to go through IVF just in order to have the benefit of PGD? Is it permitted? And over here I'll categorize it in 3 parts. There are cases which are clearly allowed and even encouraged. Some cases are not at all, and some are what we call the gray area. When is it allowed? We know that in religious circles, there is an organization called Dor Yeshorim, and when a young couple, before they even date, they go through that organization, which provides genetic screening to minimize or even eliminate incidents of debilitating genetic disorders that may afflict a child. And this happens when both parents have recessive genes for that disorder. Dor Yeshorim doesn't screen for dominant genes, only when recessive, and both parties have it, because in order to allow them to get married, and there's a very, very good and well thought out system behind it. If a couple wasn't tested by Dor Yeshorim before marriage, or they discover later on that they have a particular recessive genetic disorder that for whatever reason wasn't included in Dor Yeshorim, or they found out they have a particular dominant disorder, then not only halacha would allow them to go through IVF PGD, but even encourage it in order to avoid suffering and death in the children. That's the case when we would not only allow it, but even encourage it. And then you have another extreme. When parents want to go through IVF and PGD, there's no infertility issues, and they would like to achieve some kind of perfection. They have their own idea how to make a perfect child. Sometimes they're looking for smallest issues to be able to correct them. And that also includes when they want to choose or select a gender. And this is not permitted unless the couple knows that only by choosing a particular gender can they avoid the risk of a child being born with a serious genetic conditions. There's some conditions actually are directed through, dependent, depending on the gender of the child. It's interesting, the Australian law doesn't actually allow usually for gender selection through PGD unless we're talking about the above mentioned situation. If the couple has to go through IVF and PGD for legitimate reasons, either for fertility or genetic, halachically they may choose a particular embryo with a particular gender because they have to do something, they have to transfer something first. But even in such a case, they cannot use PGD to reject a gender they don't want. And finally, the gray area. There are many conditions which may be serious enough not to be classified as frivolous, but at the same time, they're not debilitating or devastating. In such cases, there's room for both approaches. With halachic and rabbinic consultation, the couple may choose to the direction of natural conception, or sometimes they may choose to go through PGD in order to avoid any heartache. Another example, women who have the BRCA gene have a high chance to develop breast or ovarian cancer. Some years ago, I was approached by a genetic specialist in our community, Dr. Leslie Andrews, and she asked me to give halachic support for women in the community to be tested for the BRCA gene. Medically, it's important to be able to know the condition before late 30s, and the woman can choose to have all the children that she wants to have, and then afterwards to go through serious operation or operations, which sometimes are necessary. And the question, the debated question is, should we encourage women to be tested soon after marriage, before they have children? So if tested positive, they have the choice to be able to have the children through IVF PGD, and thus avoid the future possible problems by either choosing only unaffected embryos, or at least unaffected female embryos. In all of the above cases, some are classified as legitimate, some as non-legitimate, and some gray areas. It's important, it's necessary for a couple that adheres to Jewish law to go through consultation with a halachic authority to ensure that Jewish law and ethics are not compromised. Thank you very much, Tal.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Ulman. It's so fascinating, and it's a much longer question, and so many points you raised are answers in their own. So I'm told, and as you mentioned, you do a weekly online course. So we're going to put that up in the comment section so everyone can have a look at it, and then they can join you each week for so many more answers. Thank you again.